I mean, we're live. I can hear myself now. So,
I have blood clogging my ears, so
are we ready to start, Dan?
I am.
All right. Are we ready to go, Booth? Okay. Well, welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic, our live Q&A show. So,
And
I'm Pastor Dave.
Us. Hi, Pastor Dave.
Hi. How are you?
I am good.
Who are you?
I am a recovering heretic by the name of Dan.
By the name of Dan.
Yes.
Okay. How's it going?
It's going really well outside of like blood coming out of my eardrums right now.
Yeah, from the right. But that's all right. We'll survive.
It's a trial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've been dying to broach this topic for a while now.
Uh-huh.
But today's reading from Acts brought us right into probably something that is anathema to most Americans to hear.
Uh-huh.
But that was Jesus
I was wondering where
a socialist?
I was wondering where you got this topic.
Yeah,
right.
straight out of Acts.
Right.
I mean, you read Acts just today. I mean, it's all scattered throughout Acts.
Right. This topic. Yeah.
It's scattered throughout Jesus and his sayings too,
Uh-huh.
right? Everything he says.
Yeah.
Right up to, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven.
Uh-huh.
There is so much, in modern terms,
Mm-hmm.
socialism, even communism in what
Yeah.
he says. And then I've had a lot of people come up and say, thank you. Have told me, well, it's metaphorical. It's not really what he meant. You don't really have to live your lives this way.
Mm-hmm.
But then you look at Acts and it's like, no, he obviously meant that because that's how the apostles are living their lives.
Yeah, or at least I would distinguish the Jerusalem community from as is portrayed in Acts from like there are different communities,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so yes, it's how the Jerusalem community.
And I wanted to get to that later
Yeah,
too. So
yeah.
because there is and Paul alone runs
right.
communities
Paul, Ephesus,
Yeah.
Antioch, like there's different communities that live differently, but the Jerusalem community does live that way.
And Jerusalem seems to be the purest, right? You get Jesus's brother, Peter's there,
Yeah.
So we've got the very direct
Mm-hmm.
disciples living this way.
Yeah.
So was it in modern terms? Because I know they didn't use these terms back then, but was it a precursor to today's socialism?
This is hard with Jesus because like Jesus transcends all earthly ideology.
Yeah.
And it's not just like a cop-out. That's actually a really important point. Like that there's no ideology that's been wholly sanctified by Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's like no political endorsement.
There's no, right. Just like there's no.
My name is Jesus and I support this announcement.
The U.S. Constitution has not been sanctified by Jesus. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just, there's no stamp of Jesus's seal of approval on it. And similarly with capitalism or communism or socialism or whatever the system is, feudalism, there's no stamp of Jesus's authority on it, right? Because like anytime you try and do that with Jesus, he like wiggles out of it, and this is kind of what's at play between Pilate and Jesus. Like Pilate represents the embodiment of earthly ideology, and he keeps asking him these, are you a king? These very, tell me about the power structure, here. And and Jesus almost acts bored by it. Like he's like, oh God, we got to talk to this boob. Like, like this guy, like, you're not getting it.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, no, simply just because no ideology is like sanctified like that. If people want to be a socialist, that's fine, but that's what we call a prudential question. It's I think it's wise to be a socialist, not endorsed by God Almighty.
Yeah. So why would the Jerusalem, the core apostles be living that way?
Well, I think there is I think it's a natural consequence of what I think living that way is a natural in the kind of kibbutz commune that they're living in is a natural outgrowth of what Jesus says,
And for perspective, were there kibbutzim back in those days, or is that a more modern?
That's
invention?
a modern thing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a modern thing. But it seems like structurally similar, they're not all in the same building or anything, but they're in a, they're in a community together. The story with Ananias and Sapphira is helpful. This is the story where they get struck dead in the end. And everybody's like they
spontaneously combust, right?
Yeah, well, they just die, like just keel over. But it's
for perspective. They were a rich couple.
They were a rich couple.
And they didn't give everything over.
Yeah, and that's where you need to be careful because that's kind of what we take away from the story. But actually what Peter actually ends up saying to them before they die is, while it was yours, you could have done with it what you wanted. And then he goes, but you lied. And you lied to the Holy Spirit, and therefore you're in trouble. And then they,
and the lie was given everything.
They
that
pretended
really
that they'd given everything when they'd only given like half.
Okay.
Okay. So if what Peter says is true, then the issue is, then what we learn is, okay, they could have kept their money and been all right. Similarly, they could have said, we're giving half, and people would have been grateful, but it was the lying that really keeled them over, that really did it, and I guess that tells us it's not quite socialism in that it's not enforced by authority, right? It's willingly giving over, and yet the message should motivate you to willingly give, right?
So the ideal
is
socialism.
Well, I would
by
say
today's terms.
Yeah.
The ideal.
I guess I would say the ideal is holding all things in common. I hesitate with the term because the term is so confused with in earthly ideology.
And it's got a lot of baggage.
Right. And it's got a lot of baggage. But the ideal is holding all things in common.
Marx has kind of ruined that because you say that and I want to say the collective and blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, and again, like there's no mention of state here, right? And so like they're not going about saying the Roman Empire should live this way, or the Judean People's Front should live this way,
Well, it's like Holy Grail, right? It's like an anarcho-syndicalist collective.
Right.
It's its own little thing.
Right. So and that, if I had to place a label on it, anarcho-syndicalism is closest, that kind of rejection of that kind of state authority, community building, holding all things in common, that's probably closest to the ideology than like socialism,
would be.
Yeah.
And that makes sense in a lot of ways because their heads would be not of this earth.
Right.
It's acting that way.
Right. It's just you're on a different scale, and right. It's just a different thing.
Yeah. A different scale, a different plane of thinking, really.
Right.
So why, you mentioned earlier, right, that there's no seal of approval on any constitution, any government, any political system.
Yeah.
So why is it everybody claims they've got that divine seal of approval? And to take it out of today's context, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But feudalism. And feudalism was predicated on the
God.
King was divinely appointed to rule the people.
Right.
So don't rebel, don't object. God wants that guy in charge, no matter how bad he may be.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say everybody should go and watch Maria of Tex in the Crown's speech to Queen Elizabeth on how monarchy is God's gift to the earth to dignify and sanctify the earth. It's a great speech. It's my favorite speech of the whole show.
I can see why royals would propagate that.
It's an awesome theory. It's great. The short answer is that it's a lot easier to argue that than to argue on the merits, right? If it's God ordained, you don't have to argue the merits anymore. Like it just is what it is.
Yeah, that's like a parent, right, saying, because I told you so.
Well, yeah, but that's what we all want to do, right? We want to place our systems above reproach, above the nitty gritty of like, is this actually prudentially wise? Is this effective? Like, is this working? Like we don't want to, it's easier for us to argue that, oh, God said it's supposed to be this way, and so just accept it. It's like, well, that short circuit, all that, I'm a firm believer in constitutional monarchy. I think it's the greatest government humans have ever created in human history, but that's not a God ordained parliament, and the British monarch, but I think it's prudentially the best, and I could make the argument for why. But it is a lot easier to say, well, God just dropped this system out of the sky on them, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So it's a human thing of wanting to short circuit the argument. You're trying to cheat at the debate. If it's God ordained, you no longer have to argue. Whereas if we're actually arguing whether it's feudalism or how much capitalism versus socialism do we have, and it's not one of these is God ordained, then you've got to argue about the actual cost benefit analysis of things, and there are just, you got to acknowledge the costs on both sides, and there just are, and you've got to be in the nitty gritty of, and we humans don't want to think that things we're for purely prudential. We kind of want to believe that the things we are for because they are great. Like we desperately want to believe that as human beings. And so
prop ourselves up.
Right. And so, the dangerous thing of saying, I'm going to side with X ideology or X person, for political trade-offs, that's a perfectly legitimate belief, actually, but the result then is that you tend to trick yourself into believing, oh no, this thing that I actually said I got into for legitimate political trade-offs, I really got into because it's good.
Yeah.
Because it's holy and it's good. And
I see a lot of danger there.
Well, there is a lot of
so much evil, so much villainy
that
has happened in the world.
Right. You end up
has been from people exactly self-justifying because, well,
obviously I'm for this.
Yeah. Even
you see this a lot with presidential candidates. People will be like I'm for this candidate because simply for political trade-off reasons, is how they'll start, right? And they'll say, yeah, they're kind of a mess, but but I get these things out of it,
right?
And that's actually a perfectly legitimate argument. I actually buy that argument. That's a legitimate argument. I want these policy goals.
Well, if you're honest about it.
No, right, but that's what I mean.
That's what gets me about politicians.
Well, but that's how they start, right? They always start there. They say, I want these policy goals, and this guy does those things, and yeah, he's kind of a disaster in other places, or this woman's a disaster, but I got this out of it. We'll get this out of it, and I think that aim is good, so it's worth it.
Yeah.
Perfectly legitimate argument, But then by the time of election day, a couple months later, what you've done is you've taken that into, oh, I supported this candidate because they're holy, because they're God's chosen one, and then it turns in that, and that's the slippery slope. If you don't halt yourself, you can very easily slip, because we don't really want to think, oh, I did this for, I support socialism or capitalism for cost-benefit analysis reasons.
Right, because it benefits me.
Right. Well, me, or even if you think I support this because it's overall it's better for society, we really don't want to admit that there are both bad things about it and that such a lowly, grubby way of coming to a conclusion about something.
Yeah.
We want to say we're holy. We're the crusaders following the good,
righteous.
So you may start there, but we end up at, I support President Trump because he's a great guy, because we don't want to say, well, he's not a great guy, or I supported Clinton because she's a great woman. Didn't want to admit, well, there's a lot of mess there. I thought cost benefit analysis, it was better.
When I balance my books.
Right. When I balanced the books, I thought this would be better. We don't want to admit that. So,
Yeah, so like Steve mentions, it'd be like saying God wanted someone elected by the people, so don't question what they do.
Right. Don't question what they do. It's like, oh no, we should. They're kind of a disaster,
Yeah.
but they want contradictory things,
Well, and that attitude to me, again, gets back to the feudalism, right?
Mhm.
It's just this unconditional ruling.
Yeah.
I kind of like the way the Swedish Vikings used to do it. Because with Swedish Vikings, they had kings in Sweden.
Yeah.
But they were voted.
Yeah.
You voted on the king.
Right. You voted on. Well, and there have been lots of systems that did that, right? Poland was that way. And problem is those systems tended to fall apart pretty fast. They weren't very good.
Sweden lasted a while, and
yeah.
But they had Vikings in back of them, so who's going to argue?
Right. Who's going to argue? Right. Then they became Lutheran, and everything was better.
Well, and that's a whole nother show. A whole nother show. Actually, I do want to get into that kind of thing. But that's one where I do want to have representatives, have guests on, so we can actually compare.
Yeah.
Why are you a presbyter? Why are you a Catholic? Blah, 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 blah.
Then they became Lutheran.
Steve says, why, and a follow-up to what you were just saying, though, why don't we want to say, I'm voting for person X because I benefit? Why won't we admit it's for selfish reasons?
It's for selfish reasons, or even for cost benefit. I think we desperately want to be the heroes at the center of the story. I think that's a very human. We want to be, this is why role-playing games are so popular, right? You want to be the hero. Like that's the essence of like any role-playing game, whether from Dungeons & Dragons to video games, because you're the hero.
Yeah.
Right.
Although now you're like opening up a window into my soul. Now I'm wondering why I never want to be the hero when I play D&D. I always back out from being the hero. I
mean, there's probably a psychological thing there, right?
Yeah.
But like,
if Renee were here, she'd be nodding very vigorously.
Right. But like but even, okay, my deep probing of that in the 2 minutes that we've talked about it, is even in the desire to, you don't want to be the like out front and face guy, but you want to be the behind the scenes dude, right? You want to do all the behind the scenes work, right?
Yeah.
And that's still being the hero. That's just,
I don't want to be vizier.
I don't want to be the marketing campaign guy, but I'm fine doing everything behind the scenes, right?
Yeah.
Like I only say that because I'm the same way, and so like, but it's the same. We want to be the center of the linchpin of the story in some way.
The hero's journey.
Yeah. And we desperately want that. And so you can't be that and then be like, but I support this cause or vote for this person. You can't be the moral crusader and be this was pure prudential cost benefit analysis. Why I support this cause, right? So we kind of naturally slip into, I'm on the side of righteousness.
So how does that play into Jesus and like in these early days conversion? Because the story, and it may just be PR in the Gospels, but they talk about how many people converted early on.
Yeah.
And if it had continued on that rate by about 50 AD, the entire world would have been converted over to Christianity.
Whenever somebody says that to my mom always points out, it says 3,000 believed. It does not say 3,000 became baptized tithing members.
There you go.
It's a good point,
But given that, in the context of what you were saying, why would people willingly move to a religion that has these
anti
I mean, anti-mercantile, anti-capitalism, anti-ego. That's the best way to put it. Anti-self, anti-ego. What would be the motivation to do that?
Well, I think there's no monocausal, but as close to monocausal explanation as there is. It's this, deep down we know down that path lies death. Like deep down we know that self-justifying moral crusaderism won't make us any more holy. Like we know there's an emptiness there, like I had a friend who was writing something. She was writing something on ancient religions, and modern concerns with like vitality and manliness and things like that. And how all these people want to look back to paganism, but then she pointed out like paganism was really concerned with, vitality and manliness, but that's because there was no vitality there. Like they knew that like there was no life. Like they deep down, they kind of suspected that this was all BS and there's no life down the path that we're advocating for, and I think that's a human, St. Augustine puts it as our hearts are restless until they rest in thee, O Lord. That we know we're longing for this thing, new life, which is what's promised in the gospel. And deep down, because we've tried it so many times, we know that no matter how many times you and I volunteer, we'll make this a group.
Yeah.
No matter how many things you and I volunteer for behind the scenes, that actually won't create any more. No matter how many more projects we take on, right? That actually won't give us any more new life, And I know that because I've tried it, like I've tried working myself to the bone, and I actually haven't gotten anywhere closer to resurrection on that line, than anybody else did. And I think it's the same thing in that society, that it's like, oh yeah, like this hasn't. Only way out is this rejection of ego, at the end. Like it's the only way forward.
Yeah, which is ironic because rejecting your own ego is a form of death.
No, you do have to die. There is a death involved. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
There's lots of death involved. No way out of that. But to get to that new life, you got to go through the death first.
Which explains why so few people really dive into that part of the Christian journey.
Yeah, it's it's not a fun part.
No.
It's not easy.
Well, Steve's wondering, can you be greedy and be moral?
I mean, moral is such a... I would distinguish between what I call then the Good Citizenship Award and like righteous, so like the Good Citizenship Award, Luther calls it civil righteousness. I think a greedy person can be civilly righteous. You can follow the laws, a greedy person doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to be completely altruistic and follow the speed limit, for example, right? Like you can make a ton of money and be greedy and give a lot of it away. You can, like all these things, right? Like you can set up grand charities with, Bill Gates Foundation does lovely work.
Yeah.
And yet I would definitely identify Bill Gates as greedy.
It'd be hard to argue otherwise.
Anybody who has that amount of money, right? And I think Warren Buffett's a fine, civilly righteous person, even though he's also kind of alternatively the richest man on earth, depending on what number we're looking at, and when we're looking at it. I think all that so you can be civilly righteous, you can be the good citizen and be greedy. I think, can you be truly righteous and be greedy? No. Can you be righteousness the way God calls us to be righteous? In the end, no. Like that's a different thing than this is why the can atheists be moral question I find really boring, because on a certain, like, of course they can, like on a certain sense, like, of course atheists can be good citizens. They can volunteer at Kiwanis Club and all, like all that stuff, right? Like, of course. But then there's this other question of true righteousness, which no, but that doesn't come from any of us anyway. Like we're all greedy, and the only thing that purges greed in you is the Holy Spirit working death in you that you may have new life. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
I get that, but I'm also wondering do you have to be Christian for that? Because there have been plenty of people who have been egoless and totally,
right.
I mean, to the point of willing to give up their own lives.
I don't know if you
physically
have to be. I guess I would say I can't make any guarantee. I can guarantee the Christian path. I cannot guarantee anything else. You know, I can absolutely promise you the Holy Spirit's working in you through your baptism. You know, it's what I can promise. I cannot guarantee outside of baptism. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but I just can't guarantee it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
I mean, it does.
It's like, where am I certain? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, well, I can be certain.
But how, you know, for me, part of that is how much is because of your background, your training, your seminary work.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
know.
mean,
so you're necessarily going to have a different viewpoint than.
yeah. I mean, I consider the source, but that still means I think this is objectively certain.
Yeah.
You know, and yes, of course, consider the source, but you know, you asked a Christian pastor, you know.
Exactly.
So,
which is why I do eventually want to get to that round table-ish thing. You know,
right. And it's like, you asked a Christian,
multiple faiths.
Right. You know, it's like, you asked a Christian pastor. I don't know what. This is my answer.
I want to circle back to something you had said earlier.
Uh-huh.
And this is before the mics came on. And I brought up what today's topic was going to be. And you brought up how much you're a fan of monarchy. And that, Jesus is king. That's just the way it is. But I want to circle back to that because at the beginning of our actual recording here, you mentioned how the play of Jesus off Pilate. And Pilate represented...
He's a different king than Pilate. Yeah, that's true.
And so much of what he says is, this is what you say.
Yeah.
He's not saying so much, like with Pilate, that he's the king.
Yeah.
The closest he gets is that my kingdom is not of this world.
Yeah.
So what I wonder is, was that Jesus's way of saying, we don't operate under a monarchy in the world to come? But you're mired in this primitive ancient time, and so you couldn't understand our more sophisticated way of governing.
I'd have to toss out large sections of the rest of the Bible to buy that explanation. I get, I'd have to buy out Revelation and, and Paul and Ephesians and Colossians and,
Yeah, that's why I'm focusing on Jesus himself, what he is saying.
Right.
To try to get more context out of how he's responding with Pilate.
I mean, the kingdom of heaven works different. He says, this is what Jesus says, right? His intro in all the Gospels, his intro messages, the kingdom of heaven is near, right? Like, I've shown up, the kingdom of heaven is near, but it does work differently, right? It does operate under very different principles than Rome, or any of the other shadow empires, of this world, right? There's a great hymn in our hymn book, "Till Earth's proud empires pass away." It does just work differently. It works it works through the cross, and so the cross rejects all visible glory, and all attempts at visible glory. And in that regard, Pilate can't understand, because that's all earthly empires are set up to do, is visible glory. The pageantry and the marches and the triumphs and the, parades and, that's all earthly empires are about, is visible glory, palaces and,
And they've shown that over and over and over.
Right. Or the coordinate. I mean, I am the biggest Anglophile there is in this room, but I mean, go look at the coronation of Charles III coming up. I mean,
the Saturday.
Right. It's going to be beautiful, but that's all it is. It's pageantry and glory, and and all that gets rejected in the end in the kingdom of heaven.
So what would you compare it to? I mean, it says kingdom, but there's a lot of the Bible that's restricted by the vocabulary of the times that it was written in. And I'm just wondering if this is part of that too. So what, do we have any glimpses, any hints, any clues, any teases about what that system is?
What the system is? Boy, is that an interesting question. What is this? I mean, this is why Jesus only talks about it in parables, right?
Yeah.
You know, like Jesus, like he literally only describes it in mystery language, you know.
Yeah.
So
And that's part of what makes me think
right.
that it's like you don't have the capacity to understand this now.
Yeah. I do think there's an aspect of well, like I said, it's seen through the cross, right? So like we don't have the capacity to understand it. I don't think Jesus rejects the term, you know, but it does work differently. It just does, you know. And so I guess I would say part of the difficulty in rejecting and saying, oh, it's just a way Jesus is helps us understand. That's not actually how it is that ends up being incredibly anti-Old Testament and kind of anti-Semitic in the end, because he's a Jewish Messiah, right? But Messiah is a very Jewish concept that comes out of literal kingly, like understandings, right? Yeah. So to say Jesus doesn't really mean that is to kind of reject the track that got us here from the Jewish people. So we don't want to do that, right? Like that's bad, you know? And so we've inherited this concept of messiahship, which is about kingliness, you know, from the Jewish people. And then Jesus flips it on its head a little and says, okay, this is what you're expecting, but this is what it's like. As to what that's like, you know, they're all really confused, you know, describe the system. It's confusing parables. It's the parable of the vineyard workers, where it doesn't matter how late you came, everybody gets paid the same, you know. So that's a great parable. That's a loving, you know, yay, that's wonderful. Yeah. And then there's the terrifying parables, like the parable of the wedding guest, where he invites all the people and they say no, and then fine, okay, I'll invite anybody I see, you know. And the guy shows up without a wedding gown on, and Jesus goes, he was kicked out into the outer darkness where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth, you know, and it's like, you know, so there's wonderful blessings, but there's obviously responsibilities to show up with a dress code, you know, like at the same time. That's about all I can say.
Which always bothered me. You know, what if the guy couldn't afford fancy dress?
In that particular parable, a lot of scholars would say often clothes were provided for you. It was part of what was of the wedding.
Oh, wow, cool.
Like a wedding robe was like given, you know. So the fact that he didn't wear it, he's rejecting the dress code.
So again, context, cultural context.
Yeah, cultural context. Right, cultural context matters.
Well, it's a pity we don't still do that. It saves so much money on weddings I've gone to.
It would, wouldn't it, though? Like, back to the socialism thing, like, part of what you got to understand about the ancient world is they considered money a limited good. You know, and what I mean by that is, like, we think of money as what's called an infinite good. There's always more money, right? You know, and in fact, if we need more money, the Federal Reserve just prints more money, right? You know, we're never going to run out of money, right?
Because and that's right. Going off the gold or silver standard,
right. Like
money's really not backed by anything except promises.
And when we think about our own finances, we don't think, oh, there's only a limited amount of money out in the world. We think, if I need more money, I get a second job. There are
ways to bring more money.
Right. In. There's ways, you know, you can always bring more money in because there's not a limited supply, you know. So the ancient world thought the opposite of that. There was a fixed pie of money in the universe, and there was never going to be anything more or less than that fixed pie, you know, and everybody got a little slice of it. And so if you were rich, that necessarily, to be rich meant you stole, because it necessarily meant you had a bigger slice than somebody else, which meant you were taking from somebody else, you know. So that's the framework for everything they're saying about money is not that it's an infinite good, but that to be rich is to steal because it meant your slice was bigger than your neighbor's slice.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you had impinged on your neighbors.
You had impinged on your neighbor's slice. To have a bigger slice than your honor merited meant you were stealing from your neighbor's slice.
Yeah.
You know, and so of the pie. And so in that sense, yeah, like, you know, to be rich is to steal, you know, and in that sense, yes, it is easier for the camel to go through the eye of the needle, you know.
Yeah, because there's actual evil being done.
Right, there's evil being done. Right.
Wow.
So.
And on that note of evil,
Yeah.
we must end.
Right. There we go.
But thanks. This was a big one.
Yep.
And I appreciate willing to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So cool. Until next week, when we have another big one, maybe.
See you, folks.
Have a good week.